Much is talked about the great designers, programmers, executives of companies. But at the end of the day, especially in narrative gameplay, there is one unsung hero, the writer. And we have today somebody who, in more ways than one, has been in that role or influencing that part of gaming for over 40 years. And he is Bruce, and I'm probably going to kill the name because I forgot to ask how to pronounce it. Nesmith or Nesmith?
Nesmith.
Nesmith. Okay,
Yeah, you got
perfect.
it right.
Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So I always start all my interviews off this way. Take us back to your educational background, because it's always interesting to see what a person was aspiring to do before they end up actually doing what they did.
Well, I got my bachelor's degree in mathematics, actually a Bachelor of Science. I had to take some extra science courses for that, from a small liberal arts school in Wisconsin, Beloit College. A great place for anyone else interested in a small liberal arts school. So I'm a mathematician by trade, yet somehow I've made my life as a writer for at least 30 of those 40 years.
Fascinating. So the mathematician aspect of it, and just to give us, I don't want to shame anybody by age, but when are you in college?
I graduated from Beloit in 1981, which puts me to the tender age of 63 as we speak.
Excellent. So 81, I'm guessing computer programming must have been a major aspect, or at least very present during your education then, late 70s, early 80s?
Actually, Beloit College was behind the times in terms of getting on board with computer science. They did not have a computer science program at the time. The state-of-the-art computing when I entered college was an IBM 1800 running Fortran 77, which since I entered in 77 meant it was brand spanking new. And I am actually one of those people who has programmed with punch cards. That'll tell you just a little bit about them being behind the times.
Yeah.
When we get around to it, I have a fascinating story about how I got employed at TSR that revolves all around all that computer stuff.
And I do want to get to that. So your name first pops up for me in early 1983 is when I first get first notices of some games. So you graduated in 81. You're a mathematician. Where do you go? What's the first gig, so to speak?
Actually, that makes this the right time to tell the story. So when I was in college, actually, let me back up to high school very, very briefly. In high school, I got introduced to computers and computer programming with a Hewlett-Packard 2000. And we had some of the old teletypes, the 110 teletypes and the 330 baud teletype machines. And yeah, exactly. I'm dating myself. And that's what we programmed on. But it was a high school. Come on. When I got into college, as I previously described, they had an IBM 1800. Well, between the summer between my junior and senior years, they purchased a Hewlett-Packard 3000, the big brother to the 2000 that I was familiar with. And they needed some college students to be able to convert their accounting software, because being a college, they are too damn cheap to buy professional stuff, and instead entrusted beer swilling, sleep deprived college students to put together the most important software business can have, their accounting package. And so I was one of, I believe it was 4 people hired to do some of this programming over the summer. And summer on a small liberal arts school, the university is dead. There is nobody there. There aren't any professors. There's very few administrators. There is nobody. There is nothing to do. So I had this brand new computer system, and I'm programming in COBOL, by the way. So for anyone who's ever programmed in COBOL, you have my sympathies. I did it for one summer. I'd hate to have to do it for a living. I spent 8 hours a day programming in COBOL. I spent 8 hours a day sleeping. I spent 8 hours a day writing games on a computer, not in COBOL. Most of it was in BASIC. BASIC was very in vogue at the time, and Fortran is a horrible, horrible programming language to write games in. And by the time I came back by the time all the students came back to school in the fall to this brand spanking new computer system, the only games you could play on it were the games that I wrote. And so as a result, they became very popular. And I'd love to tell you they were amazing games, but the reality is they were the only games, and man dying of thirst in the desert, I believe there's a phrase about that. So one of the most popular games that I made, and it actually wasn't half bad, was a game called Dragons. And it was a dungeon with the graphics to the level of pound signs being walls and periods being the empty spaces and little brackets around a number representing chests and less than greater than signs around a number representing the monsters, and you type things in. And this became a big hit, this static 10-level dungeon. It had an actual line of sight going on, so where your player character was, you could only see what you could see. And it was extremely popular. 45 minutes down the road is Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, home of the venerable TSR Incorporated. And TSR decided the year of my senior year that they were going to get a Hewlett-Packard 3000 to run their operations. And the salesperson, of course, was the same salesperson because she had the region. And she said, there's this kid down the road. He wrote a game that looks and sounds a lot like the stuff you guys make. Maybe you should talk to him. So here I am getting a bachelor's degree in mathematics, which anyone who knows anything about degrees in mathematics knows it's practically worthless. I get my first suit ever. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. And TSR calls me and says, we would like you to apply for a job. Now, I give this talk, and I tell this story a lot, but I give this talk at universities and colleges every now and then. And one of the things I tell students who are interested in getting into the gaming industry is, do not do what I did. Do not wait around for your dream job to call you and invite you to apply. I am the one lucky son of a bitch that happened to. I've taken it. The rest of the universe cannot have it anymore. So don't do it. Go out and seek your job. But at the same time, I tell them the lesson to be learned there is any employer wants to know that you can do the job. And that's what I did without thinking about it or realizing it. I proved I could do the job they wanted. They wanted a computer games programmer. I made computer games. Look at that. I had fulfilled their need. So when you want to get a job, do the thing they want you to do, because nothing makes an employer, and I've been a hiring manager for many, many years, nothing makes an employer more comfortable than being able to prove that the person they're looking at can do the job. And that is one of my favorite stories to tell about how I got employed at TSR Incorporated as a computer games programmer.
Now, okay, number one, you are right. Nobody else is ever going to get that gig.
Nope, that's done. It's been done now, and I have the only one.
But now I'm curious. So, okay, so you're programming this thing. You've made some games. Were you? I'm guessing you were familiar with Dungeons and Dragons then at this point.
Yes. You made this. When I was in high school, I had a friend, coincidentally, also a math major, who was enrolled at MIT, and he had played D&D there, and he brought it back. He was obviously older than we were, and he introduced it to a bunch of high school students, including me and my friend Steve. And when he went back to school, Steve and I had no game to play. We didn't know where to buy this stuff. We didn't know how it worked. So we stayed up till 3 a.m. for like a week straight, and we invented a role-playing game, completely new mechanics. It's actually a 2D20 for those people who are familiar with it, but we created that way before 2D20 came along, and That is actually the system that the Dragons game I just described is based on.
Cool. Now, TSR was buying this Hewlett-Packard in order to run their operations or to get into the computer game business?
No, they hired me, and I can tell you about my first days there and my interview. These are all just amazing, who the hell is this guy stories, to do computer games on a TRS-80. And then very shortly after that, the Apple II Plus. I did the majority of my computer games work at TSR on the Apple II Plus.
Okay. Now, so who interviewed you? Was it Gary himself or?
No, it was not Gary. So they called me in for an interview, and I'm wearing my suit in a place that does not see suits. Although the people that interviewed me were more comfortable with suits. And they stuck me in a room. And it turned out, I learned later, this was the vice president of sales room. And they stuck me in a corner in a folding chair. And there were, if memory serves me correctly, 8 people arrayed in a quarter circle around me, shooting questions at me. This was my first ever real job interview. I didn't know this wasn't normal. I didn't understand this is not how an interview is supposed to go. So they shot questions at me. I answered them to the best of my ability. I was a little nervous, but since I didn't realize it was abnormal, I was okay. And then they offered me the job. And I had done some research, and I knew what a data analyst should be paid, and they were underquoting me. And so I negotiated, and we kind of met in the middle. And lo and behold, it turns out I ended up being the highest paid person in my division because they were paying the rest of the people like crap.
Yeah, there are some almost mythical stories about how people really did not get paid well at TSR. So.
Oh, yes. Ben Riggs has written an entirely wonderful book that goes through a lot of that. And I have a lot of my own stories as well.
Okay, so now I'm very interested in this. So officially, is this the games division of TSR, or are you under which umbrella are you under inside the organization?
They weren't organized enough to have me under an umbrella. So, maybe a newspaper over my head for the rain, I don't know. My manager that I reported to was Michael Price. It was he and I. That was the entirety of the group. I'm not 100% sure who Mike reported to. He may have reported to Al Hammock, who was in charge of the writing division. I'm not sure. But I know that Brian Bloom was taking a very active hand in it. Brian Bloom was the one who wanted to get into computer games. He spearheaded this. And for those people who don't know, Brian Bloom was the major shareholder of TSR at that time. Okay. So he was, some executive vice president or president role. I don't know what his actual title was, but he was definitely one of the executives. So I actually work with Brian Bloom a fair amount. A fair amount meant I saw him once every month or two. But Gary, no, I did not work with Gary. Gary was not interested in computer games. Gary was interested in the tabletop role-playing games.
Okay. So when you get this job, how are they describing, or what kind of information did you get about the goals of entering a computer game industry for TSR?
They wanted to make computer games. That's pretty much their goal. There's a reason this department, if you want to call it that, did not last very long or go very far. It was extremely poorly organized, poorly supported. Okay. Let me tell you about my first day there. This is probably my second favorite story beyond the one I've already told you. So I show up to work and I'm wearing a suit. And this is a place where if your jeans didn't have holes in them, you were overdressed. So I'm wearing a suit in a jeans and t-shirt shop. And I come in, and this is in the old building in downtown Lake Geneva, which was condemned a few years after this. It was a former hotel. The walls were not straight. The halls were literally crooked. The floor was uneven. There were actually people who put a rounded pencil on the floor and watched it roll to one side. It was that bad. And so I'm in this little teeny bedroom with this like closed closet on the side that had been converted into an office. And all over the walls were hundreds of Post-it notes with little drawings featuring the Mouse Gestapo and the Police de Chat, the French comics of the same name. All because my boss, Mike Price, had a dream the week before about those two figures, and his friends thought it would be really funny to have him come in on Monday and have his entire office papered with all of this. So imagine the surreal experience of being in a suit as a fresh 21-year-old, fresh out of college, in a place that doesn't wear suits, and you go into this dilapidated room that is, maybe 10 by 8, I would estimate. And all the walls are covered with these comic figures of some comic you've never heard before, because I've never heard of the Mouse Gestapo before until that day. And so they sit me down in front of a TRS-80, and they tell me that Mike Carr has worked on this game called the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Mike still is, he's still with us, very, very partial to the 24 Hours of Le Mans, bordering on obsession. He loved it. And so my first job was to figure out how to get the results of the race to print quicker. They were taking too long. And so I implemented a modified bubble sort, which is not exactly high technology, which meant that as things bubbled to the top, I could immediately print them. And I got the results to be printed faster. And Mike Carr and the other people were ecstatic. And I just kind of shook my head. Okay, yeah. Modified bubble sort for the win.
Okay. I'm guessing, was this written in BASIC on a Trash 80? Or?
Yeah. It was stored on a paper tape.
Wow.
It was stored on a paper tape.
And this is 1981.
This is 1981.
So, okay. Yeah, this is definitely not high tech anymore at that point.
No, within a year, we were working on the Apple II Plus. The TRS-80 was dustbinned.
Okay. And now, obviously, TSR has a ton of IP at this point. It's not just Dungeons and Dragons, and tons of board games and other things. What guidelines are you given? What is the budget that is given for software development? What ideas were you given to work with? How much leeway did you have?
Under Mike Price, I was a guy in a chair. So I don't think there was a stated budget. TSR was not very good with things like that in those days. And I think they just said, we want to do this. Mike said, I need another guy. So they hired a guy and they bought a computer and they set him down and had him start making games. That was the extent of the planning that was going on at that point. I'm not 100% sure when Mike left, but probably within a year to 2 years, he was gone and I was left to be the only person in the department, and we moved to the Sheridan Springs building, which was not dilapidated and falling apart. At that point, I became the de facto head of the department, but they weren't going to give me budgetary discretion or even information. I made requests. Hey, we'd like to buy this. Okay, let's go ahead and buy that. Was about the level of it. The games that we were making, we made 3 of them while I'll use the word in charge, but I'll use it very loosely. We made Theseus and the Minotaur, Dawn Patrol, and Dungeon Board Game. Theseus and the Minotaur and Dawn Patrol came from, actually, let me back up from it. Theseus and the Minotaur was my idea. Dawn Patrol was an idea that came from above. Dawn Patrol was something that Mike Carr, once again, had worked on. And he thought that would make a great computer game. I'd have to agree with him. And Dungeon Board Game was something the executives very much wanted because the Dungeon Board Game was one of their signature products.
So, okay, so you guys have these three projects.
Mhm.
You, as far as Moby Games is concerned, have programming credits on both Dungeon and Theseus, or at
Correct.
least you're co-programmer, I believe, on Theseus or
Um,
Soul.
Steve Sullivan did the artwork. He
Ah,
did the
okay.
artwork on both of those games. I don't remember if I did any. Keith Engie was the other programmer, and Keith was 10 times the programmer I ever was. Keith wrote Dawn Patrol in assembly language, and the thing worked flawlessly, and me, BASIC was the language of choice for me. That is not as good as assembly language in those days. So Keith may have done some help, and he may have gotten some credit. It's just been too long, and I don't no longer recall which way that
No
went.
problem. Now, these three products all get done. So you basically have an RPG, a board game adaptation, and a 3D flight sim.
I would hesitate to call Theseus and the Minotaur a role-playing sim. It was,
Okay.
but yeah, we have those three games. If you want to know more about the actual game itself, I'll be glad to dive into it. But if you're interested in the business side of it, yeah, I would not call it an RPG. It was, you know, sort of just a first-person go through a maze and kill some minotaurs experience.
Okay. Okay. Now, from a now you've got, let's say you've got the product, uh, the TSR apparatus at the time. Uh, who takes over marketing of this product? How is this brought about? Because you guys did not have the D&D license itself. That was sitting over at Mattel, correct?
Correct. We did not. Which may have been one of the reasons we didn't do a Dungeons and Dragons game per se. The Dungeon board game is not Dungeons and Dragons. It is the Dungeon board game. It is its own property. But to do a role-playing game on the Apple II Plus was probably beyond our skill set. Keith might have been able to pull it off with my help, but I certainly would not have been able to do it alone. And a while later, you started to see the very first, I'm going to go with Ultima games that came out for the Apple II Plus, and they required you to do all kinds of fancy memory tricks and get expansion boards to even make that work. In
Gotcha.
terms of marketing, I don't remember the specific individual, the person's name that was in charge of it. I do know that Will Niebling was in charge of the sales department, and marketing probably fell under his purview at the time. But the extent of the marketing was that they would put these titles into the Random House catalog, expect hobby stores to pick them up and put them on the shelves and hope they sold. In other words, they treated them just like Dungeons and Dragons products. They put them in a catalog right next to, the player's handbook or the adventure of the month, whatever it might happen to be, and hoped that stores would choose to stock them, be it hobby stores or later in the process. I forget who the big sellers were at the time, but the bookstores were big ones. Walmart and Target clearly weren't available by then. Kresge's may have been been the big store that would have gone beyond that.
Gotcha. Now, I stumbled across one ad for the three games in the back of Blip magazine, which was Marvel Comics' attempt at a video game magazine. So I'm obviously there was some budgeting for it. And I have to ask, I mean, and I've talked to other people who were active in the industry at the time, so I'm guessing I know the answer. Was there any thought given to who your demographic was for these three titles?
No. The marketing in terms of demographics and things like that was non-existent. It was Brian Bloom, Mike Carr, people like that sitting around and saying, these games are cool, let's sell them. And once again, these are the reasons why this did not go over well. And quite frankly, even though it was my own work, Theseus and the Minotaur should never have been greenlit. It was a substandard game that nobody wanted that game. Nobody was asking to play that game. But there was no thought given to it. It was much more, like I said, the reaction of we put it in the catalog and we hope the orders come rolling in. And of course, the orders did not come rolling in.
Now you say TCS shouldn't have been greenlit. Was that an effect of not having enough time to work on it, an effect of not knowing what the standards of the time were from competitor products? What would you say was the issue there?
The time was fine. It was more of the latter. The game did not have enough substance. You weren't doing enough. There wasn't enough fun involved. It was one level above wandering around in a 3D maze that had 3 levels. And the 3D maze technology that I put together, that was actually kind of cool. But you wander around in a maze, maybe you'll run into the Minotaur or the Lady Minotaur or the Baby Minotaur. Maybe you won't. If you get out the other end, you win. There's just not enough there. Yeah, you're wincing. This is, and this was my idea game and my first professionally created product that actually made it to the shelves. And your wincing is right on point.
Now, you talked earlier about your experience with D&D. You talked about making some games for a mainframe system. How much experience had you had with microcomputer games at that point?
0. The first time I ever laid hands on a home computer was when I sat in front of that TSR 80 in their offices and pulled up the screen to look at that code. That's the first time I ever sat in front of a computer of that quality.
Okay. I have to ask then, I mean, I'm guessing you weren't that aware of what the capabilities were of these machines. What was the learning curve like?
Well, for the TSR 80, it really couldn't do a whole lot. It wasn't a lot more than a glorified terminal, and I had worked obviously on terminal graphics and terminal type stuff in college, so that wasn't so bad at all. And what Mike Carr's design called for didn't have any graphics anyway. It was all text reporting. I mean, if I'm going to put down Theseus and the Minotaur, the 24 Hours of Le Mans game was, even a step below that, being literally only text reporting. And they never even attempted to box it or ship it. Keith Engie, who we hired, he did understand the technical foundations of the machines, and he was a tremendous boon to me and to the department as well. But we never did get any, what is the state of the industry? The closest we came was Brian Bloom took me on a field trip to a gaming store in Milwaukee, where we went and looked at the shelves. And actually the store owner got really nervous. He thought we were a competing store looking to crib his prices, and he almost threw us out until we explained who we were. And then all of a sudden we got the red carpet treatment. But for a brief moment there, he was, taking us by our collars and heaving us out the door until we explained who we were. That's the extent of the market research that I believe was done. That and the fact that, we had a small library of games that were purchased, and we played them, and so we kind of knew a little bit about what was out there. But this is also the wild, wild west days. I mean, this was the days when somebody who did not have a computer science degree could get a job programming. These were the days when there was no such thing as a gaming degree, a degree in game design. Those things didn't exist. You had to find people who had related experiences, personal experiences, and hope they could do the job. And so those are the people we hired.
Gotcha. And so these 3 products hit the market, or they hit the catalog, I should say.
Yes.
And how long does it take to figure out that they're not moving?
It's been a long time, so I don't know the exact dates, but I would say within a year, everything was shut down. Actually, I could probably track it to when the Marvel role-playing game box set came out. I don't have the date for that off the top of my head, but my first non-computer game product was the Day of the Octopus 8-page adventure that went inside that box. And that is a result of the fact that they shut down the computer games department and they moved me over into writing.
Okay.
So whenever that came out, minus the development cycle for that, probably 6 to 9 months, would be when they shut it down. So it didn't last long. I would say probably a reasonable estimate would be I spent an entirety of 2 years working as a computer games programmer.
So those 3 products came out. Were you then already in development on further projects that then never saw the light of day, or how
Yes.
Okay.
We had a Wizard War game that we were working on, Keith and I together. Actually, the design actually had a lot of potential. The idea was to have 2 wizards who would fight, that you had a base of spells and supporting graphics and a fairly cool mechanic based on color that would determine how things worked. It was supposed to be very graphically splashy. So in terms of a concept and the preliminary work, I think it had potential. Lord only knows if it would have actually developed into anything. But that's about the time that they said, this isn't working out. We're losing money on this. We need to kill this department.
Gotcha. And you then transitioned, like you said, into actual pen and paper gaming.
Correct. With
How does that happen?
Mathematics and no experience as a writer.
So, other than somebody in management really, really likes his recreational drugs, how does this happen?
I think part of it is guilt. They felt bad for shutting it down. They didn't want to have to fire somebody. They were doing well financially as an organization, and they had a need to have another writer. And so they invited me to do that. I don't believe I even had to provide a writing sample. I don't think they thought there was a lot of writing talent necessary to do that work in those days, that they could just pull anyone off the street who knew the games, and I knew the games. I'd play games with these guys to be able to do this work. So, if you're counting, my 4-leaf clover is 2 leaves down and was looking very worn. I have 2 leaves left here.
So you get onto this Marvel licensed RPG.
Mm-hmm.
You're working on that. Were you a comic book reader?
Yes. I could not afford comics, but I, like many people, love to go sit in the stores and read them off the racks until the clerk or manager kicked me out. So, and every now and then I would be able to scrounge together enough cash to actually purchase 1 or 3. But one of the nice things about working at TSR during that age was the license called for us to get a copy of every single thing Marvel printed.
Nice.
So every month, Jeff Grubb, who was the author of Marvel Comics Marvel RPG, would get a box filled with all the things that Marvel produced. And when he was finished reading it, he would send it to the next person, who would send it to the next person, who would send it to the next person. So over the next, what would that be, 10 years probably, I read a lot of Marvel comics. Actually, that's not quite true. I spent 4 years not at TSR. So over the next 2 years, and then later 4 years, I read a lot of Marvel comics.
Okay. So we have a gap there we'll have to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're working on this pen and paper game, and you work the entire time you're working, or this stint at TSR, you're working on the Marvel product, or are you working on other things as well?
The writers there would work on whatever needed to be done. You'd work on D&D stuff, AD&D stuff, Marvel stuff, Gamma World stuff, whatever was there that needed to be worked on. You would get your assignments, and that's what you'd work on. One of my more notable products of the time was the War Rafts of Kron. And the way this was put together, actually, no, that was from my second stint. I'd have to go back and look to tell you what else I wrote in the first one. Oh, I bet I worked on the Lankmar stuff. Yeah, with Doug Niles. I think I worked on Lankmar then.
Okay.
But everybody worked on a lot of things. You were given 1 month to write a 32-page unit. So the 8-page Marvel product, they probably gave me 2 weeks. I no longer remember how long I took on it to write that. But so if you wrote a 64-page adventure or supplement, you'd be given 2 months to write it. So in the course of the year, you would write 12 of these 32-page units, and that would be somewhere between 6 and 12 products, unless you were lucky enough to get onto a really big one, in which case it might suck up an entire 4 months. And that would be how they schedule it. So I worked on D&D stuff. I worked on Marvel stuff. I worked on whatever they need me to work on.
And this is basically you're just a salaried employee and the assignments are coming through and you have these deadlines to meet and that's it.
Yep.
Interesting. So I'm guessing royalties were never a consideration.
What's that word? Royalties? When I first got to TSR, they offered me a salary of $16,000 a year, and I had done my research and found that a data analyst made $18,000 a year, and Doug Bloom and I compromised at $17,000 a year. I found out later that the writers and editors were earning around $11,000 or $12,000 a year, which in 1981 dollars is still pennies. They are paid very, very poorly. Once again, they weren't valued. It was seen as we're giving you a chance to do something you love, and I can pull anybody off the street. You don't like it? I got 5 other guys waiting behind you who want this job, and I can probably pay them less than I'm paying you. So shortly after I started there was a little bit of an armed revolt over the salaries. I mean, people couldn't even afford to live with roommates. It was pretty bad. And so the company gave the entire group a flat $4,000 a year salary bump. Everybody, whatever you're making, add 4. So that moved these people into the $15,000 to $16,000 range. I got lumped in with that. I moved from 17 to 21. So I was actually doing quite nicely for the times. But there was never any suggestion of any shared profit. In fact, the profit sharing mechanic, and I will preface this by saying I'm working from my memories, so the facts may be a little bit murky because the story I'm about to tell you is about things that were not legal and were bad, and I believe Ben Riggs probably covered this better than I'm about to. The profit sharing, you could take a portion of your salary and put it into the profit sharing plan, although they called it something else at the time, and a pension plan, something like a pension plan. And they took all that money and they invested it in company stock. So you were buying TSR stock. That's not legal.
No,
that is not legal.
For a variety of reasons.
Retirement fund be invested in the company itself. And it turns out that when the company did not perform, all that money went away. I don't believe anyone ever saw a dollar of it. So all the money I put into that plan just vaporized, went up in smoke. That was the extent of what they had as far as that's concerned. There was another little kerfluffle over salary versus hourly. Even though we were salary, we were required to punch a clock. Now, this is not necessarily in and of itself illegal, except when you start leveraging that if you don't work your 40 hours or you don't do this or you don't do that, you can be penalized for it. Well, you can't pay someone salaried and then demand that they work hourly. That is also illegal. And there was a lawsuit filed, and the people who filed the suit, I don't know who they were, won their suit, and those of us who worked there actually got a check out of it. I actually got a small check. I no longer remember the amount. I had to file paperwork saying how many hours did I think I worked that I was not paid because they were treating us like hourly employees. So TSR was poorly managed. They did not understand employment law. They did not understand financial laws. One of the, since this is a financial program, I will throw another story at you here. You're in luck. You're hitting all my really good stories. At
Bring
one
'em.
point, while I'm there less than a year, Kevin Bloom, who was the chief financial officer or COO, one of the two, for TSR, had to get a new bank loan because the company needed more money. And he had heard that I was a mathematician. And indeed, my specialty was probability and statistics. And so he came to me. There's Kevin Bloom, COO, walks into this dingy little, used to be a hotel room, 8x10 office to talk to me, who's been employed, period, for less than a year, and says, I need a statistical model that will prove that our company is going to make more money. We'll continue to make money. And so I set about making him a statistical model. And the sales at that time did indeed form a curve like this. But as any mathematician will tell you, that doesn't prove that you're going to continue to go like this or that you might not be going like this. There's no way to know that. So I did some statistical analysis, and I'm working on it like it's a college project, which means I'm not paying attention to any deadlines. So a week later, Kevin calls me up and it's like, where's my model? I have to meet with the bankers tomorrow. I don't have this model done. So guess what I did all night long? I put together a model, and my supporting numbers were razor thin that we were going to continue on an upward trend. I actually could not prove if we were at the flux point of that. I gave them that data. TSR got their loan. So I've been a financial analyst at the tender age of 22 with a bachelor's degree in mathematics and no financial background.
Now, which year was this? 84?
It would have been 81 or 82.
Okay, 81 or 82. And TSR still has a couple good years ahead of it. If
Yes.
memory serves me right. Yeah, so it's your predictions were accurate, at least in the short term. So you mentioned that you left, that you were gone for a while and then came back?
Yes. TSR went through, this was after we had moved into the Sheridan Springs building. Those of us who worked at TSR divide time between those two buildings. There's the before Sheridan Springs, and then there's the during Sheridan Springs. Those are two eras, if you will. That and the Lorraine Williams versus the Gary Gygax era. Those are the two ways to divide your membership in that club. TSR started having financial troubles. Better people than me have detailed those. But they went through 4 rounds of layoffs. And in the 4th round of layoffs, I did something for which my wife has yet to forgive me. We are going to be celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. So obviously at a certain level, she's given me a certain level of forgiveness. But in the 4th round of layoffs, I went to Harold Johnson, who was our boss at the time, and I said, I volunteer to be laid off.
Ooh.
I knew that my background in computers could land me a job a lot easier than a lot of my friends who had backgrounds writing D&D products. Where do you go from that? The answer is you don't go much of anywhere from that. So I volunteered. And so Harold laid me off along with some other people. And I picked up a job 2 weeks later at a place called GBS, Graphic Business Systems, which had nothing to do with the gaming industry whatsoever. And we worked on graphic business systems for Fortune 500 companies, which I did for 4 years before I got hired back to TSR.
Okay. Now, I gotta ask, the the programming that you had done, Fortran, COBOL, is, and when I'm thinking graphic business systems, early 80s. Are we talking software for making graphs, or are we talking about
Yes.
3D
I did
rendering?
very little actual programming myself. I did do some. Most of what I was doing was putting together shelfware and supporting it, training people in it, assembling IBM PCs, which were the new hot commodity at the time. And these are high-end PCs, being used to drive presentation systems like boardroom presentation systems, and to create slides and financial reports or whatever other reports people wanted to do. So a lot of graphs and charts. We sold a lot of film recorders. You make a graph with the software and it would export it to a film recorder and you get a slide, and then you put the slide in a slide deck, and then later they would be electronic slides as opposed to physical slides. So that's the kind of work I did. I did some programming work for doing some other products that they had that were, pieces that tied other things together. But mostly that's what it was. I worked on a program called Xenographics. The program was called Mirage. The company was Xenographics. Mirage was a high-end chart-making graphics software, and I was, quite frankly, one of the top trainers in the Midwest on that software, and did tech support training for that, and then would build systems and install them. Small shop, had about a half dozen people in it.
Cool. Now, obviously, I'm imagining that they have slightly more sophisticated budgeting and so forth for product development in a company like that. But not the gaming business, so we can move back. What lures you back to TSR?
A round of universal 20% pay cuts for everybody working at GBS. GBS went through its own hard time. It hired a hotshot salesperson to boost their sales. He was pretty successful, but then he demanded a higher cut of the sales prices, and the boss didn't want to give it to him. So he left and took a good chunk of the customers with him. So GBS went into lean times, instituted 20% pay cuts for everybody. You're working in a 6-person, 4-person shop. That's not a good sign. I did not feel comfortable. I had kids at that point. I did not feel comfortable supporting my family in that environment. That didn't feel like stable to me. So I went and reapplied to TSR, and Jim Ward, who was the vice president, actually he may have been just the director at that point, I don't remember his exact title, was kind enough to hire me back as a Dungeons and Dragons writer. And that was, those next 4 years were probably the heyday of my career. At that point, I actually knew what the hell I was doing. I knew how to work. I knew how to deal with deadlines. I was actually a valuable employee as opposed to a what the fuck am I doing employee.
Okay. And now, were you working on the main D&D line, or this is already the point when they're starting to create a lot of offshoot worlds using the D&D rule set, right?
Correct. This was the high point in that career. Lorraine was in charge of the company. Gary was gone by then. Actually, he was still wandering the halls for a little while, but then he was gone. But this was the Lorraine Williams administration. And my biggest claim to fame during that period is the writing the Ravenloft box set, which is one of the most popular offshoots of D&D, one of the best campaign settings they did, probably second only to Forgotten Realms itself.
Gotcha.
During those 4 years, I probably produced 30 different products in a wide variety of things. I would say I was reasonably valued. They had me work on a board game, the infamous Dragon Strike board game. That was my work. I worked on the card game briefly that they did, Spellfire. I got to do some premium products like the Ravenloft board game, Game World 4th edition. So, definitely my my sweet spot when I was at TSR.
Well, and there's a couple of interesting products in there I do want to ask about, and it goes a little bit back to this budgeting issue. It's not video games, but still, it's the games industry. So, uh, when you're putting together these products, I'm guessing you're a salaried employee.
Correct.
So they have a pretty good idea of how much it's going to cost to produce the product, artwork, and so forth. Uh, what is what was the decision-making process when creating these offshoot products? Was there an editorial board just deciding, okay, this is the general concept, in the case of Ravenloft, horror, blah, blah, blah? Or did they just say, we need a box set, come back with something, and you're like, I'll do this thing with vampires?
Some of both. This was the fattest part of TSR's catalog these years. They were producing the most products at that time. And there was a little bit of everything. There were some ideas that came from the ground up. There were things pushed on us from management. We want this. There was definitely some of the, we need a box set for next year. What are the good ideas? And, we got to all contribute them. For instance, I was part of the group that came up with the Dark Sun concept. I was just one voice in the room. That's, definitely wasn't, my voice was not any louder than anybody else's. But that was a classic example of, we need something new. What's it going to be? And all the actual people who are designers and writers, they were in a room and, hey, what can we do? What would be cool? Dark Sun came out of that. Ravenloft was more a matter of, here we have this Ravenloft module done by Tracy Hickman, and it is, far and away our most popular module. Keeps selling year after year after year. Well, let's do a box set on it. Okay, who wants to do it? I'm at the front of that line. I'll be all over that. And so I was fortunate enough that Jim picked me to be that guy. And then there were cases, one of my favorites. One of the things that they did to fill out the catalog with the smaller products is Jim Ward would come up with titles that he liked. And sometimes there was an accompanying piece of art that hadn't been used or they could reuse that was laying around for it. And so he'd have a title and he'd have a piece of art. It would go in the catalog, and then they'd throw that on somebody's desk and they'd say, make something out of this. And for me, that the one that always sticks in my mind is War Rafts of Kron. This was a high-level D&D, not AD&D, adventure for the Companions box set, and it was a title in the Random House catalog, and it was a piece of art. I believe it was an Elmore that showed a storm giant coming out of the waves, and there was a raft in front of it. And I asked him, what's this about? He said, it's War Rafts of Kron. He went back to his office.
Well, that's a perfectly valid explanation.
Yes. So I had to come up. I mean, what is a war raft? And the art limited me because it was literally a raft like Robinson Crusoe would make. I mean, you might picture the word war raft and it's some enormous thing like in the movie Moana. No, it was literally an 8x8 piece of, logs strung together with two people standing on it, throwing spells and shooting arrows at a storm giant or coming up out of the water. And I had to come up with an adventure for that. So I did. So there were a lot of ways products got decided. And Jim Ward had a heavy hand in a lot of that. For example, and hopefully my memory is correct on this, the derivation handbooks, I think, were one of his babies. The Complete Barbarians book, the Complete Fighters Handbook, the Complete Thieves book. And those were like printing money. I mean, the production costs on them were low because they were just a book. You didn't have to do a box with other components. And the leatherette covers, pleather, I think they call it, the plasticized leather, was relatively easy to imprint and looked great on the shelf. And those things sold like 100,000 units each, the first few of them, which was printing money for TSR.
Wow. Yeah, a buddy of mine had an extensive collection of those. And I always
Yeah.
just kept looking at him going, we're never actually going to look through any of that.
Well, the beauty of those is that the players could buy them, and that's why they sold so well. Because one of the problems that TSR had with its entire product line is they were, in the words of some of our executives like Jim Ward and the Blooms, we are only selling to 1/6 of our audience. We sell players handbooks to everybody, and everything else gets sold to the dungeon master. We're not selling anything to the player. We need more stuff to sell to the player. And that was by far and away, the best product we ever made that sold to players. I actually got to work on one product. It was the, I don't even remember what they called it, but it was a player's kit. It came in this plastic clamshell that was like a suitcase. And so I was in charge of what goes in there. And so we had character sheets, and you got a little pencil that went in there and a ruler. And I don't remember if we put a figure in. We might have put a figure in. We put the dice in with the crayon, because that was your crayons for your dice to mark them. So it was everything a player should need to have, and a little carrying case, cheap plastic clamshell carrying case that you could carry back to and fro your game sessions. My memory is they did not do well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I came into TSR, into the D&D fold a little bit later, sort of would have been 94, 95 is when I started playing. But yeah, even by then there was so much product that just, I mean, someplace I hear have the official D&D soundtrack on CD to play in the background. Yeah, it's
well,
nonsense.
I got to write the first Quest box, which came with an audio CD.
Really?
So, yes, that was mine.
Well, speaking about multimedia experiences, we do have to mention Dragons. You mentioned Dragon Strike already.
Yep.
We do have to go back to. I do want to touch on that because interactive media, blah blah blah. So, how did that product come about? Was that we need to do something with a VHS and then invent a way to use it, or did that
No.
work another way?
At the time, HeroQuest was making an enormous splash. And Lorraine had always wanted to get into board games. Board games were seen as the holy grail, because at that time, Parker Brothers and Milton Bradley, both now owned by Hasbro, were the king of the kings in gaming. You go to these toy fair game shows in New York, and where Mattel would set up their booth and whatnot, and that's where all the big players were. And she wanted to be a part of that, and she felt like TSR was just outside that inner circle, and board games were the way to break into it for us to become a player at the level of Milton Bradley and Parker Brothers. So how do we compete? We'll do a HeroQuest knockoff. So how can we distinguish ourselves from HeroQuest? How can we do what they do better, and how can we make it be a gateway into Dungeons and Dragons? Because the other thing that they were constantly working on was, how can we skew younger? We're selling to teenagers and college kids. We need to push that down. We need to get them really excited about the game at a younger age, so that they'll want to play it, continue to play it when they get to be older. And they actually did a marketing survey on this, did some marketing work, and found that below the age of about 8, and there's a Piaget stage that children go through that hits it around 8, role-playing, it's just not going to work for you. You don't get it. You're not emotionally, mentally, mature-wise ready for the things it is. And there's another Piaget stage that hits around 12 or 13, where you actually can get the full set. But there's a version of role-playing that you can play. Mostly you're just like a power gamer kind of player in that spot between 8 and 13. So that's where we were marketing the board game to. So we needed simple mechanics, and they wanted to be able to say 8 and above. That was the thing they were looking for. So the mechanics needed to be really, really simple. And how are we going to distinguish ourselves? Let's give you a videotape that shows you how to play the game. So we did. We put together a videotape that shows you how to play the game. The game introduced some very basic role-playing concepts without actually getting into the whole of what D&D was. I got to fly out to California to oversee the editing of the tape. Flint Dilley, Lorraine's brother, actually did the filming and script writing for the entertainment portion of it. There's a little adventure set that went at the beginning, and I went in and did the editing of it. And that ended up being the production for Dragon Strike. And Dragon Strike sold fantastic. I believe it sold about 100,000 copies, which that's really phenomenal. And
Yeah.
as Ben Riggs has put out there far better than I'm about to, one of the key mistakes that happened was they decided to order a second 100,000. And they did not have the support from that. They tried to ram it down Random House's throat, and then they tried a little financial bait and switch to get Random House to pay for the development of the product as well as the product itself. And Random House wouldn't give them the money, and that started the downward spiral. And if you want if you want the details of that, I would once again point you to Slaying the Dragon by Ben Riggs. He goes into it in excruciating detail. But that was one of the signature moments of peril. I'm sure there were some others that led up to that, and there were definitely some that followed, but that was one of the big moments, was when they robbed Peter to pay Paul to produce another 100,000 of Dragon Strike. And it didn't go anywhere. They had saturated the market. Nobody wanted it. It sat in warehouses.
Now, and I have to ask a little bit, because you're a salaried employee, you're developing product, and the way you describe it, you finish one product immediately, you've got the next assignment.
Yep.
What was your interaction with the sales figures on a product? What was your interaction with how it was marketed? Did you get to just see from like the corner of your eye the marketing people are doing something over there while you're working on the next project? Were you brought back through different stages as the person who wrote it or created it to consult on what's the best way to market stuff? What is that relationship inside the company between the creative staff and those that are bringing product to market?
Practically non-existent. For the most part, the people working on this stuff were worker bees. We did our work, marketing did their work. Later in the process, his first name's Rick, I'm trying to remember his last name, began with a B and I don't remember it, was the marketing guy. He got a little more chatty with us to try and draw information out of us, because we were also the market. I mean, we wrote stuff that we would buy. So we were the market in that sense. So he tried to mine that information, to which I'll give him a lot of credit. But as a small organization, it was not very rigidly set up along lines of authority, or reporting. So information would leak. You'd hear things, and people would talk, and you'd find this stuff out. From my personal point of view, because I ended up working on some of the signature how can we open our market products like Dragon Strike and First Quest, I ended up being able to be in the room when Lorraine and some of the VPs were talking, and some of this information would come out. So I got to hear some things that probably some of my compatriots didn't get to hear, because I happened to be in the room at the time. But
Gotcha.
No, they didn't ask us how to market this for the most part. They thought they knew how to do it, and a lot of their strategy, quite frankly, at that time was still, we give it to Random House, and Random House will put it in stores, and then they started doing TV commercials, and that's where things got interesting because they didn't know how to make a TV commercial, and they had to hire people to do it right.
Oh, okay. Now, and I do remember Dragon Strike when it first came out, and then I also do remember some very discounted copies of it at a later point.
Well, yeah, that's from that extra purchase.
Yeah. So the company is starting to not do so well. At what point do you exit?
I was sitting in one of these meetings with Lorraine and the vice presidents, and Jim, and I was not a fly on the wall, but I was definitely not somebody who should be making a lot of statements, don't speak unless spoken to kind of moments, which is fair. I mean, this wasn't my meeting. I was definitely not the focus of it, and that is appropriate for that. And I don't remember specifically what was being said at the time, but something that Lorraine said hit me emotionally. It was like, this place is not going to survive. What she's asking for is not going to happen. It's not going to go the way she wants it to go. And I need to get the hell out of here, or I'm going to go down with the ship. And Lorraine is a very interesting character. She, at the same time, both saved and sunk TSR. And you have to give her credit for both, whatever you may want to think of her. And she didn't understand the gamer mentality. She was not a gamer. She was not even gamer adjacent. This to her was something that was going to make her money and something that had some sort of cachet. And she was always trying to gold plate things. And gamers are not gold plate people. And she didn't understand that. And that's part of what was causing the problems. So at that point, I started sending my resume out and sent it out to Bethesda Softworks, and ended up getting a job at Bethesda Softworks and leaving TSR. And very shortly after, because I left in '95, very shortly after, I think '98 was when the real shit hit the fan, and they ended up being bought by WotC.
Now, Bethesda Softworks, and I do have to, since you didn't have much experience with computer games the first time you were making computer games, had that changed in the intervening years?
No, but the video game industry had changed. When I was first doing it straight out of school, a game was made by one person sitting down at a computer and programming it. Maybe he got some art from a professional artist. That's about it. It was a one-man show, and the games reflected that. That was the scope and the size of them. By the time I went to Bethesda Softworks, games were made by teams. And there were teams of writers, designers, artists, and programmers. And I was being approached as a writer-designer. So my programming days were behind me by that point. But the fact that I had been a programmer, and a fairly serious programmer, made me a very valuable asset as a writer and a designer. I understood the technology. I understood computers at a deeper level than someone who was just a writer or just a designer. I got it. And I could talk to the programmers, and I could talk to them in their own language. That's a valuable commodity. But to be blunt, my history at TSR, even if I had not had that computer games history, made me an exciting prospect for the people at Bethesda Softworks, particularly Julian LaFay, who was the one who really advocated to hire me.
Okay. Now, had there been, while you were at TSR for that second stint, that was the era when SSI had the rights to the D&D license.
Oh, yeah.
Were you guys at all involved as the creators of the pen and paper original in consulting or in any way involved with the computer renditions?
We did a little bit of consulting, not a lot. I got to do a little bit of it because of my background. If a particular SSI title was themed around something a particular designer did that was highly significant, they might get to consult a little bit, like Jeff Grubb did with Azure Bonds, I believe. But largely, Jim Ward took that on himself. That was his baby, and he did that. Just as an interesting aside, by the way, there were two competitors for the license to do the TSR computer games at that time. Lord British wanted desperately to do them. And
Really?
yes, and SSI wanted.
Origin.
Lord British said, I will do the development of this for free if you let me, please, 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 please let me do this game for you. I would desperately love to do it. SSI said, we won't do that, but we'll give you a higher royalty. And so they went for the money rather than for the talent. And the rest is history. I mean, Lord British went on to do Ultima and become, a really important person in the history of video gaming. And SSI went on to make an amazing amount of those gold box games and make a ton of money, both for themselves and for TSR.
Yeah. I interviewed Joel Billings, the founder of SSI. The way he portrayed it was that he came in with the concept that, we're going to shift basically the entire company over to do this. It's not going to be about one game. We're going to have the engine that's going to be able to do all this. And even though financially, not having to, no upfront costs and so forth, his understanding of it, obviously he probably didn't know who else was in the bidding, but they went with SSI then.
Yeah, I would take his understanding over mine. He was clearly closer to it than I was.
Yeah, well, but he didn't mention that Origin Systems, Lord Richard Garriott's company, was involved. So that's actually interesting.
Yep.
Okay, now so were you ever brought in to consult on anything like that? Did you have any contact with those with SSI then?
No, just a very little bit where Jim Ward would run some things by us or let us look at little pieces of what they were developing. By and large, a lot of the SSI games were taking existing TSR product. For instance, the Ravenloft box set. The Ravenloft game was one of those, and that's one of the ones that I had just a razor thin amount to do with. And they would just make them into their games. So I was, they didn't really need us to do it. They were taking off-the-shelf product and converting it into a game. I believe the Azure Bonds, and I hope I'm getting these names right, was something for Jeff Grubb had to do more work on because that was based off of a book, and so he didn't have an adventure with maps and things like that to work from.
Gotcha. Now, so when you do make the move over to Bethesda, was that just an open position there? Are you just contacting them? Do you have any kind of in to the company?
No, I sent resumes out to a whole bunch of places. And I actually interviewed at Origin Systems, did an interview personally with Lord British, actually, with Richard Garriott. So I keep calling him Lord British because that's how I was first. I didn't even know his name was Richard Garriott until years later. He may not even like being called Lord British anymore. But
he'll still dress up for you. It's okay.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. So I actually interviewed with him. I interviewed at Westwood. I interviewed at a bunch of places, and Bethesda was the place that looked most interesting to me. So that's the place I went to.
Cool. Now, were you familiar with their output at that point?
Not a clue. I'd never seen it. I had seen the Westwood games. I had seen the Origin Systems games. These old guys? No, I had no clue.
Excellent.
So, and I'm continuing my lucky streak. This is the third of the four-leaf clover leaves being torn off and being thrown into the wind as I use it up to advance my career into what will eventually become a juggernaut of a video game company.
So you come into Bethesda. I'm guessing this is shortly after Arena shipped?
Yes, they were working on Daggerfall.
And what are you being brought in as, or what is your official position?
Well, along the lines of my earlier stint at TSR, this was a smaller shop. There were maybe 40 people there, and they didn't really give me an official title. Bethesda was not well managed, in my opinion, at that time, and they were very fond of giving people a lot of responsibilities, but not giving them a lot of authority to implement those responsibilities. So it kind of became obvious to me later I was supposed to be directing the designers, but they never actually told me I was supposed to do that. And so I just ended up acting like one of the designers. It was a very, very strange little environment there.
Gotcha. Now, I am curious here because as a designer of
Mhm.
a video game, now I can imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, designer of a pen and paper RPG is responsible both for mechanics as well as for the beats of the adventure.
Oh yeah,
If
every
correct.
word written in one of the TSR adventures was crafted by a designer. That includes all the numbers, all the stats, and then fixed up and made serviceable by an editor. And TSR, they had some of the best editors. My hat's always off to those people.
So now, what is the role of the designer, at least at that time at Bethesda, for a computer RPG? Because I'm guessing you're not doing any programming. How are you still completely in control of the mechanics?
There were a couple of different things people would do. Systems design is the sphere of design work in video games that takes care of mechanics and the game rules and whatnot. And while at that day and age, it was a little bit muddy, today they're actually very discrete positions. We kind of all did a little bit of both, and whatever you were good at, you would be tapped to do. I was particularly good at system design. I got tapped to do a lot of that, and I did a lot of that work on Daggerfall. But by the time I got there, many of the systems of Daggerfall were already in place. So there's only so much that I could do. You would also write what stories there were there, and then you would do what today would be done by either artists or gameplay designers. And later Bethesda may be called level designers. You'd actually build the map in the tool and place all the geometry and the pieces together and stick the monsters in and do all that. And I did all of that during my stint. So they had a tool where you could actually build the spaces that people would play in. They had a tool that would manage the quests. It was a god-awful tool. It was horrible. The tool for laying out the levels was far better, but the tool for the actual story stuff was bad. um, and then you'd work with the programmers to come up with the mechanics, the mathematics of the rules systems for it. You do it all.
Okay. And was it difficult for you to adjust to working in a team on the design? Because I'm guessing even when you were doing like a box set, it was pretty much you determining what was going on.
Yeah.
But now you actually have to design something that's working in a larger context where difficulty level has to be set in, and the tools and the software and the general rules of the universe are being made by a bunch of different people simultaneously. So what was that like for you to learn that new method?
I do not remember any angst over that. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I adapted pretty quickly and pretty well to it. As is typical of a lot of development, even though you may be working with a team, you still have your little area that you're in charge of. And it has to interface with other people's work. So you do have to pay attention to the team dynamics, but you still did have ownership of a particular thing. So I got to work on character systems, for example, on Daggerfall. So I got to have a lot of say on that. But I don't remember having a lot of issues with having to work in the team environment. It went pretty well. And that's probably a testament to the people I worked with, that they were, willing to to listen and work with me rather than try and just have me work for them or anything like that. That, you know, they kept it as a team environment, which makes it easy to onboard new people.
Understood. And so Daggerfall launches. The well, yeah. I remember there's some issues with it when it first came out, right? It was a bit
Its launch
buggy.
got delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed, and finally it could be delayed no longer, and so they shipped what they had, and you literally were unable to finish the game. It was physically impossible to finish the game. It was that broken. And
Now,
over the next year or so, one of the junior programmers, Hal Boma, continued to put out updates of it on his own until you could actually finish the game. It was still a massively broken game, but you could at least finish it. So hats off to Hal Boma.
so what was that experience like? I mean, coming from a world of deadlines, you've got 6 weeks to do this and then it's done, to what does a delay in the game, or the realization of a delay, or the communication of a delay, even look like internally on a game like this?
It's someone, usually one of the executives, coming down and telling everybody sternly, sometimes more than sternly, that things are fucked up and we've got to fix it. And it puts this sinking knot in your belly that I at least had rarely had in a professional environment. Because you talk about adapting. I didn't have troubles necessarily adapting to the people or the work that I was doing. But we're talking about a product that's going to take a year or more to produce, and I'm used to working in 32-page monthly cycles, where the longest thing I'd ever worked on took 6 months, and that was highly rare. Most things were you got 2 to 4 months to work on it. And the entire fate of the company was resting on this, because they were struggling financially, and they had put all their eggs in this basket, and it was not going well. And so they instituted mandatory overtime hours. I mean, we were all salary, but you know, you had to be there 60 hours a week. We were all exhausted. We were all on edge. It was crunch time in the worst possible way, because on top of us working our asses off, we were constantly being yelled at. I came home one night and my wife told me, if this doesn't stop, I'm leaving.
Wow.
Because I had made her move across the country from Wisconsin to Maryland. She ended up there with 3 young kids. I wasn't home. She knew nobody. And for all the pain and agony I was going with, she was going through the every bit as bad, just differently. The lead programmer had a nervous breakdown, was hospitalized. And I mean, it was bad. All the stories of bad crunch you've ever heard of in video game design, they all happened on that project. It was horrific. It was a bloody introduction to the realities of video game design.
Now, was it just because the original design was too ambitious for the time frame? Was it faulty technology? Was it mission creep or feature creep?
It was mostly that it was overscoped. What Julian, and to a lesser extent Ted Peterson, wanted to do was just way more than what the time and resources would allow, and to a certain extent the schedule. On top of that, they did not have robust practices, particularly on the programming side. And so the source code was constantly buggy. The bugs just kept creeping in. They couldn't get rid of them. As soon as they'd stamp out 5, 10 more would appear. They just couldn't get a handle on it. So they should have decided to do a smaller product rather than going from Arena which was, basically a wander around a dungeon and kill some stuff, basically an SSI game, but more for modern times, to something that was truly a full-fledged role-playing game. But Julian and Ted, they were dreamers, and God bless them. What they dreamed was fantastic and amazing. But it got away from them. It really got away from them, particularly Julian. And, the pressure on him got to be too much at one point.
So, yeah. So you go through this horrible crunch. The product ships. Are you just placed on the next project that's in the pipeline, or is there a question of whether or not the team will even still be there? What's the transition from one project to the other now in this new environment like?
Anytime in any development company, you're immediately transitioned to a new product. There is not downtime other than vacation time. You finish this project, the next day there's a new one on your desk to do. That's just the reality of the industry. They can't afford to have these expensive, highly talented people sitting around twiddling their thumbs. So the conclusion of the project, we worked on other things. I worked on Terminator Skynet. I worked on PBA bowling, things like that. I made probably the biggest single mistake in my career at this point. The boss, Chris Weaver, CEO of the company, came to us with a product that he wanted to do called 10th Planet. It had come to him in a synopsis form from his friend Dean Devlin, who made Hollywood films. And I had partially made my bones at TSR by taking crap projects that other people didn't want and turning into something that was profitable. I was able to make decent games out of them, but also I won the admiration of my bosses because I was willing to do dirty work. So I stepped into this bullet and said, I will do 10th Planet. And I should never, ever have stepped in front of that bullet, because 10th Planet was a disaster from the get-go. And in the video game industry, if you take on a project that doesn't look like it's going to succeed, that costs you your job. And it cost me my job.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the premise of 10th Planet was that I think I had a 1-paragraph description. Actually, it's a little more than that, but I had an opening paragraph for a novel where the retrofitted F-16s are defending the dome on Pluto against the sonic beams of the Mayan aliens.
Mayan aliens.
No science fiction fan ever would agree to any of the words I just said being all in one sentence. The idea, which actually at its core wasn't a bad idea, was that there's a 10th planet out there that every now and then gets close to the sun, like some rogue comet. And it comes by every 1,000 years. And when it does, the aliens wake up that are on this frozen ice ball of a planet. And they influenced Mayan culture. And so they're all the evil bad guys that you see in Mayan mythology. Okay, fine. But the other part of the premise was that we had expanded to fill the entire solar system. I mean, we had a freaking Capitol dome on Pluto. No one's going to put anything on Pluto, let alone a Capitol building, which implies there's everything settled on Pluto. And that they had gotten rid of space combat, and so they had to take F-16s and retrofit them for space to defend ourselves against aliens.
Oh, I'm sorry. My brain is hurting.
Oh, it was horrible. It was horrible. And so I turned the story around and I made it somewhat palatable. But much like Julian before me, they wanted a game that could be done in under a year. and the game that the industry would be, or that the market would be willing to accept, would have taken 2 years, maybe more. And so I said yes when I should have said no, and it got overscoped and it didn't make any deadlines. And eventually they fired me and they canceled the project. And so I left the industry for the second time.
Now, okay, I'm trying to imagine this game, and I'm guessing space flight
Yeah, space flight simulator with space flight combat, and we were actually doing some pretty good stuff there.
Okay. It feels terribly like the Wing Commander movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
It was going to be in that space. Whether it would ever have been as good as Wing Commander, probably not, but it was going to be in that space, and that's a viable market.
Especially back then.
There were a number of games out there that worked for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're out of a job. And are you out of Bethesda or just out of that position?
Oh no, I'm out of the building. I was out of work for 6 months. 6 months. 6 months where my neighbors, God bless them, brought by entire platters full of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to help feed my family.
Holy crap.
Holy crap is right. I eventually got a job at a place called Convera, who did search and retrieval software. Their signature product was Retrievalware, and I got hired as a technical writer writing their rules manuals. Because that's what I could find.
Wow.
I didn't have to move my family. I got to stay in the house. And so for the next 4 years, actually it was longer than that, it was closer to 6. I worked out of the industry, writing rules, then eventually becoming a QA person, and then becoming head of the QA department, making some signature mistakes as a QA department head, and getting fired from that management position, but stayed in the company, worked in production, and then left that job to return to Bethesda.
Wow. Sorry, I'm trying to the fall, so to speak. Just the pressure that must have placed on you.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, it's hard to imagine.
Here's the thing that people who have not been out of work for any length of time don't realize. Your sense of self, your definition of who you are intrinsically as a human being is more tied up in your job than you realize. And when you don't have that, trying to keep your own morale up, trying to feel like you're a valued human being, just a human being in this world, gets more and more difficult every day. Every day I would get up and I would go onto the job boards and I would send my resume out for jobs. Whatever jobs I thought I could get, all over the map as to what they were. Obviously, I ended up as a technical writer. How's that for a change of career? But I did not realize how much my own self-worth was tied up in the fact that I have a job and what that job is. And so for people who are out of work, it is really, really hard. And trying to keep your morale up and try and get a job when you've been out of work for 6 months, that's a challenge. That's a challenge.
Terrible, terrible.
It is. It's hard. It's hard.
And so how long did you stay as the technical writer?
Oh, probably a couple of years. Might have been less than that. Might have been a year and a half before I moved into quality assurance.
And how long were you in quality assurance then?
Once again, I'm going to estimate I was probably there for another 3 years, maybe slightly longer, moving from just one of the engineers to being head of the department. And I made the critical mistake of believing the academics version of quality assurance, which does not sync with the real quality assurance. I bought
Yeah.
into these books that said this is how you should do it, and you should have all these papers written this way. And no, what the real world needs is we need this thing tested. We need it tested quickly. We need to bypass all the fancy paperwork, and it needs to get done. And they were right, and I was wrong. And so they removed me from the position, and they should have. And then I went into production where I was, helping maintain stocks and duplicating disks and doing all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so sorry, I'm understanding the. Sorry, this took a turn because in my notes I kind of had this as a whole, but it opens up a couple of interesting questions because quality assurance is obviously somewhat connected with your experience with all of the delays on Daggerfall. It's definitely something that, at least from the marketing standpoint, could also apply to TSR. So, but it was never something that you were directly involved with before.
Nope.
Would you say what lessons or did you gain a better understanding about what went right and what went wrong in those previous projects and previous
Oh, yeah.
positions through your experience? What do you think you learned in the quality assurance then?
Well, at Bethesda, there was virtually no quality assurance. There was, I don't even remember the numbers anymore. There were a couple guys in a room somewhere that would test the game, and that was it. There was no value put on testing. The people in the staff were supposed to do the testing. The people who were making the game were supposed to do the testing. They were supposed to
Ooh.
prove it worked. But at the same time, Bethesda Softworks in those days and age was a small boutique shop. They didn't have a lot of staff. So, they didn't put any value on it. So this was my first exposure to a company that was producing, quality product for most of their clientele were three-letter agencies in the government, but they also had a lot of, big corporate clients. Um, doing it professionally, doing it for real. And seeing that, quality assurance was actually a valuable and important part of the process. And by the time I was done with that, I had actually done every part of software development, short of making the art. I have done it all, baby. I have done programming, I did project management, I did QA, I've done the writing, I've done the design. Art is the only thing I haven't done. I've done and sound. Oh, actually, I did sound because I did that in my early Bethesda days. I actually put together the special sound effects for Terminator. I was working the
Oh,
programs,
wow.
doing the sound design. Yeah, so I've done it all except for the art.
And is this the point when you go back?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
how does that transition happen?
Convera laid me off. They were going through some hard times themselves, and they were paying me way more than they should have because I kept my old salary from being a quality assurance manager while I'm pressing discs. And so they let me go. And they probably should have let me go long before that, but they were kind and they kept me on. And so I went back to Bethesda, hat in hand, to Todd Howard, who had been a guy I had worked with, but now was in charge of the entire operation there, and said, "Hey, Todd, can I have a job?" And he very graciously, he gave me a job. And so 2 weeks after I left there, I'm back doing work that I actually enjoy, and I feel like a valued human being. And I stayed there for, 14 years? I'd have to count it back, but I had this pattern, 4 years, 4 years, 4 years, 4 years. This broke that pattern, and I stayed at TSR at BGS for the rest of my career until I retired a year and a half ago.
Amazing.
Actually, closer to
And
2 years ago now.
now, and in that time, obviously Bethesda just explodes in size,
Yep.
explodes in success.
Yep.
And there's a couple of games in there that I do want to touch on just because of the effect that they had, or at least changes that, from my perspective at least, that they showed. And if there's other highlights, please interrupt and let me know. So you come back, and the first thing I see that is Redguard.
Yes.
First project back. Now, that one was a very, very different beast from everything else they were doing.
I didn't work much on Redguard. By the time
Okay.
I came on, it was at the very, very tail end of it. So I did a little bit of, internal testing, a little bit of work, but it was largely in the can and getting ready to do its thing. So Oblivion is what was being worked on hot heavy when I joined.
Oblivion already.
Yes. But
Okay.
I mean, Redguard, Morrowind was already out and in the public's hand. Redguard was just finishing up. It hadn't been released yet, but it was just finishing up. But Oblivion was what was being worked on, and I did a lot of pivotal work actually on Oblivion. I was
obviously you've been away from the Elder Scrolls series for a bit at this point. You were in the quality assurance. You were unemployed for a while. Did you stay on top of what was going on in the video game industry and computer game industry while you were away?
Not really. Raising 3 kids, I did not have the discretionary income to be able to buy a quality system and spend a lot of money on video games. So I only knew some things about it. I was not very versatile with the gaming industry, but I kept tabs on Bethesda a little bit. I didn't really understand how pivotal Morrowind was, for example. I did not know the state of the industry otherwise. I learned a lot in that first year because they had a games library, and I played the crap out of the stuff they had and learned a lot.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, what would you say was the biggest change or surprise when you came back?
The growth in the industry. You have to remember, when I left it, teams of a dozen were making games, and the games they were making looked very crude. Now all of a sudden we're looking at Morrowind and now Oblivion, and there's a reality, a verisimilitude of what the game looks like. You actually feel like you're there. It's the first time it actually felt like a Dungeons and Dragons session. When I'm playing Oblivion, I actually feel like I'm in a tabletop role-playing experience. It felt that good, and that is that's groundbreaking for me. It was a very exciting time. Those were very cool days.
How did you have to adapt your design philosophy? Yeah, I mean, you just said it. It was very crude before. You talked earlier about how the tools were not good tools for designing quests. How did those limitations affect your designs, and how did your designs evolve with the better tools and better technology?
Well, one of the things I was able to do was draw more upon my TSR experience, which was kind of a surprise to me. Things could be more free-form. When I was working on Daggerfall, it was very, very rigid. The quest system there was so limited that there were very few things you could do. It had to be very lockstep and in order, and that was it. You were in and out and you were done. When I was working on Skynet Terminator, that was a first-person shooter, and the maps were very on rails. You go here, and then you do this, and you walk through this hallway, and these guys are here. Now all of a sudden, it's like, oh yeah, they can go wherever they want to go. Where they want to go, let them do that. That's more like D&D. That's more like my experiences at TSR. And initially, I wasn't doing system design. I very quickly transitioned into it, but initially I was just doing adventure design. So in Oblivion, for instance, the Thieves Guild, that's all my work.
Oh.
So what I got to work on was, hey, what's going to happen with the Thieves Guild? I got to put together a proposal, run it by Todd. He told me how horrible it was. I put together a second proposal. He said, I really like that. And then we went ahead with it. Actually, that proposal process, Todd taught me one of the more valuable lessons that I've ever learned in terms of putting together a story. Typically, in a lot of these stories, you have this big, elaborate backstory. All these things are going on. And then you bring the character, the player, to the front, and then he works through this other stuff. So I describe all this backstory, all this great, wonderful stuff. And I'm about to start into what I actually want it to be. And Todd stops me and says, that's great. That's what we want to do. And there were reasons why that wasn't going to work. And we talked through that, and I had to put together a new proposal. But the lesson I took away from that, and I used professionally for many, many years after, is the backstory tends to be the most exciting thing that these authors and game designers put together. I want to play the backstory, and I can't tell you how many times I've told other designers, your backstory is really cool. I want to play that. Your front story is boring. I don't want to do that. I want to play your backstory. And that's what Todd did to me, and I took that lesson forward myself. You know, the Silmarillion is exciting. Not that the Lord of the Rings isn't, but I want to play that. I want to see I want to see Sauron become Sauron, and the forging of the ring. Let's do that. That's exciting, Although you get to take the ring and destroy it.
That's a fascinating point. Well, and I mean, everybody loves the origin story of a character. Just look at Marvel movies.
Oh yeah.
But so you've got these tools.
Uh-huh.
The world is so much more complex. I can imagine, though, that whatever you've designed is now exponentially going to increase the number of items and characters and everything else that needs to be created in order to populate this world. With that increase in resource costs, is there now an extra dimension for the designer in budgeting? Well, how much can you design and still stay within a budget, or is that a concern for somebody else and the designer just gets to design?
No. There is definitely a budget, and that's all definitely talked about in advance. And while I did the Thieves Guild, I very quickly, because of my computer programming background and my previous relationship with Todd, moved into systems design and started to become part of that team. And a lot of the economy and the whole suite of things that the game allows, monster stats and leveling and all that, became part of my purview. But when you go in, the art department will come to you and say, this is how many objects we can create in the amount of time that's available with the staff we're going to have. These are how many monsters we can do. This is the number of animations that you're going to be allowed. You go to programming and you say, okay, these are the things I'd like the character to be able to do. And they say, we can do this, 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 and this, but not this, 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 and this in the time permitted. And all that stuff has to be figured out ahead of time. And then, of course, no great plan survives boots on the ground. 3 months later, it's got to be revised. And that process of revision is continuous. It continuously gets revised as you learn more. Oh, these animations are, 3 times more difficult to make as we thought they were. Oh, and there isn't enough memory to hold all this stuff all at once. And, our lead programmer on this particular facet of things just quit. So, we're going to have to bring somebody else in new. That's going to delay this particular feature isn't going to be able to become available. All of that stuff has to be constantly watched and managed and handled. But yeah, no, there was we can handle this many objects. We can handle this many creatures. And then as designers, we start to try to get creative. Okay, so troll is a creature. Can I have different colored trolls? Can you give me a troll that's a little bit bigger? Oh, well, one that uses this animation, but not that animation. And you start negotiating with all the other departments to try to get the maximum out of what you have, out of these limited resources. And God bless them, one of the best things about Bethesda is that these groups work together. You hear horror stories of other studios where, you know, programmers and designers don't get along, artists and designers don't get along, artists and programmers don't get along. And so there's these barricades where they're each holding their own turf and they're denying you things because, oh, you can't have that because we've got to have this. That wasn't and isn't the case at Bethesda. You know, they're all willing to work with you to try to find the way to maximize it. They'll take your ideas, they'll give you new ideas. Hey, how about this? I thought of that. And that cooperative spirit is what allows a lot of their games to be great.
Interesting. And I do have to ask, I mean, especially in these more open world RPGs, you do get this feeling, you know, okay, I'm in this area of the map, and now all the quests are connected inside this area of a map. But you will still have the overarching quests, or there'll be, you know, you do something for this person, they're happy, but you also get something that attaches to a larger quest that's connected to another area. How does that kind of coordination happen? Is there like a master designer who's doing the overall quest, the overarching story, and then there's individual designers doing different areas like a thieves guild, or how does that sort of come about?
Every studio, approaches this differently. At Bethesda, they try to give each designer something that is theirs that they can carve out, and they do the work in that. Sometimes they're not able to, and it's got to be split between people. But for example, the main quest in Oblivion and in Skyrim were both done by Kirk Coleman. He did the entire thing. He did all of the quest logic for it. He did all the scripting for it. He worked with other people to create the dungeons and to order the art and to order the special effects pieces. But he did all of that himself. And then a completely different person would work on the Mages Guild, or, you know, College of Winterhold in Skyrim's case. A completely different person would do the Assassin's Guild, aka the Dark Brotherhood. The miscellaneous quests were divided amongst different people. The random dungeons that didn't belong to any particular quest group all were done by different people. On Oblivion, Ken Ralston was the lead designer. And then when Ken left, Kurt and I kind of took over. And then for Skyrim, I was lead designer for Skyrim. And then I would oversee a lot of that work. And in both of those roles, I did a tremendous amount of the systems design. Kurt and I kind of did that together. He had his 40%, I had my 40%, and the rest was random people doing this, that, or the other thing. And so I would spend a lot of my day in spreadsheets going over, you know, what all items we might have, you know, watching the art budget for it, reviewing other people's work, going back to the spreadsheets, looking at creature balance, character system balance, going and reviewing people's work, you know, wash, rinse, repeat. And that's kind of the daily life of a design lead for one of these big projects like that. But a lot of the stuff that ties it together, that was in Kurt's and my hands to do that. A little more in mine because he had the main quest as his thing, which is a big responsibility.
No, definitely. Now, with Oblivion, Morrowind before it already, but Oblivion is your first entry into having to get games onto consoles as well, correct?
Correct.
Now, from a development resource management standpoint, and from a design standpoint, how did you guys deal with getting the game onto essentially a lesser, I mean, not lesser, the chips on a PlayStation or an Xbox could be
A
just as
tighter
good as on
resource.
PC. What?
Well, there's two things that have to be handled. Most of this, by the way, is handled by the programming and by art. They're actually in the hot seat for getting things onto the consoles. One way to think about this is one image, say a 256 pixel by 256 pixel image, which is a smaller image because 1K by 1K is kind of typical these days. The memory requirements for that exceed the memory of in the entire quest line for the main quest. Just that one image takes up more memory than an entire quest when you're just looking at the quest logic. Art is where all the memory gets sucked in. Programming is second. We are a distant fourth, because actually sound comes ahead of us also. So in terms of the constraints of, say, the Xbox or the PlayStation, we aren't so much on the hot seat. Art is on the hot seat, programming is on the hot seat, and we just do whatever we can to support them. Where we come into play is, what do you mean you made a quest that has 50 moving actors all in one scene? The programming can't do 30 frames a second if you do that. Get rid of half of them. And so we have to try and make cities and towns that have limited numbers of actors walking around at any given time, dungeons that have a limited number of actors walking around at a time. That's really probably the biggest thing that we had to worry about in terms of trying to get things to work on those consoles. But as you pointed out, development is done on a PC, but it is, these days at least, on a daily basis, ported over to the consoles to see how it's fitting and how it's working. Back in the Oblivion days, it was halfway through it, they started putting it on consoles, and you get a new version every couple weeks or so. But that's still pretty darn regular. It's looked at constantly as to how to fit it, and really hard decisions are made constantly as to how to make it fit.
Okay. So basically always have to design for the lowest common denominator.
You do, but the design isn't affected as much as the art and the programming are.
Gotcha. Now, moving away from fantasy and into Fallout, because you also worked on Fallout on several Fallout games.
All the Fallout titles that Bethesda produced, I worked on.
Okay, and so now that was again similar to Skynet, first person. Well, Oblivion was as well, correct? I'm trying to remember.
Fallout 3 used an updated version of the Oblivion engine. Okay. And Skyrim used an updated version of the Fallout 3 engine, and Fallout 4 used an updated version of the Skyrim engine. It just kept the same engine moving forward.
Oh, okay. Now that setting, that world, did you welcome the change from a design standpoint?
Yes and no. It was definitely cool and exciting to work on something new, something different. But when you embed yourself in a franchise like the Elder Scrolls, you're always seeing, oh God, the next one we can do this cool thing. Oh my God, that's going to be so amazing. And you want to do that. And then you're told that the next 3 years of your life will be on Fallout. And we didn't have any say on Fallout. That was a Todd thing. He went out and he got the license for that, and it was a great thing to do and a tremendous boon to the company, and they produced great product. So it's kind of a mixed bag for us. There's a bit of we get to do something new and different and exciting, and at the same time a disappointment of, but I had all these other cool ideas I wanted to do, and now I'm not going to get to do them. So you get both.
Gotcha. Did you guys actually try play through the original 2 Fallouts in preparation, or how did that work? Since it was an existing IP.
I did not. There are people on staff who had played through them. Quite a few people actually. I personally did not. The difference in what those games would be is night and day. I mean, you're talking about a top-down what's it called? Isometric view game, which is technically not 3D, compared to a first-person 3D game. Completely and utterly different. But we did need to pay attention to the lore. We did need to pay attention to thematically what was going on. And Emil Pagliarulo, who was the lead for Fallout 3, he was well-versed and had played through all those games. And, he's able to keep us in sync with all of that.
Gotcha. Now, from a design standpoint, again, also resources, and you have to forgive me because I am not up on these series as much as I should be. There's a lot more recorded voice acting coming into these games as you progress. Now, obviously, from a design standpoint, in the text days, well, you need to change a line, and that's it. That's not the same thing now with the audio recording, especially since the audio recording needs to be matched up with the animation and all this other stuff. How did you deal, or was there a moment where, okay, now we've locked in the story so that the audio can be done, which I'm guessing is not the way it works, but that would be the logical way of doing it? Or is there constant re-recording of lines as the design requires it?
What we did on Oblivion was completely different than what was done on Fallout 4. That whole process evolved and adapted and got better and more refined with each successive project. So on Oblivion, it was a finish everything, record everything. By the time we finished Fallout 4, everything was done on the fly. As soon as you had a line of dialogue, it would get recorded, or at least reasonably soon. And so it was constantly moving. So on Oblivion, there comes a point where dialogue is locked in and you cannot change it. If you want to change it, you have to go all the way to the top and you have to plead your case. And the answer is almost always no. It better be really breaking something. And that would happen at an earlier stage than we were happy with. There's no way around it. Stuff's got to get recorded. It takes, a month or two to record all that dialogue. You just can't change it. By the time Fallout 4 came around, the recording burden had grown to, I'm going to estimate here, it would have probably taken 6 months to record it all. So there's no way you can wait to the end. So you're recording dynamically. As soon as you have enough worth recording, you record it. And then you just keep doing that and you build into your pipeline the idea that we're going to have more re-recording sessions. And so hopefully when you get to the same point where you would have had to lock dialogue, and as they call it dialogue lock, at the end, you already have 90% of your dialogue recorded and you only need a few weeks to do the re-records. And you actually are able to finish later, which is a boon, because you don't have to stop and then restart it. And this is part of the evolution of the process. The other thing you touched on is when we were doing both Oblivion and actually all of the projects, we used a system that did sound by phoning so that we didn't have to sync the animations to the audio. Only some of the signature scenes in Skyrim and Fallout 4, might be Fallout 3, I don't remember, actually had perfectly synced dialogue to animation where they actually worked on them. But that is a very drawn out and expensive process to do. And so it was only for certain cutscenes that were critical to the main quest or to certain signature moments were done that way. Otherwise, it's done dynamically. And Bethesda has gotten dinged for the fact that it's, facial animations were not up to industry standard. But they made this trade-off of, do you want to have a lot of dialogue or do you want to have a little bit of dialogue that looks really great? We chose to have a lot of dialogue.
And normally that is a better thing for an RPG.
It is, but here's one of the other lessons about video game design that is universal. Your audience doesn't give a shit about your problems. They just don't. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear your excuses. They don't want to hear the excuses for why it's late. They don't want to hear the excuses for why the character keeps running into the wall. They don't want to hear why your animations don't sync up. They don't care about that. You know, it's not perfect, and I'm pissed. And that's where it goes. And so you have to try to set their expectations. You try to have to set your work to meet that expectation, and try to find the compromises that will have the least amount of pain for the most amount of people. And you know, that's video game design.
That actually makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and
really,
and they don't want to hear your excuses is one of the watchwords that we had to live by, because in our own work we had to stop making excuses. Okay, so this doesn't feel right. Well, the audience is not going to care. You're not going to be delivered in the box with their CD or DVD to explain why this particular problem happens. It's not good enough. You either have to fix it or we have to cut it. Those are the only two options at this point. There's no making excuses anymore.
it is harsh, but yeah, I mean, especially an entertainment product where people just want to sit down and dive in, especially the hardcore who are going to be spending 15 hours. Yeah.
I don't know if you follow Penny Arcade, but
yeah,
at one point those guys went and made a video game.
Yeah.
And what they came back from with that was eye-opening for them. They had a completely different view of the industry when they saw the actual sausage making process and exactly how hard it was. And every bug that every customer finds, we know about. And we cry about softly at night at our desks because it's there and we can't fix it. We may even know how to fix it, but it is found too late. The fix would cause other problems. It can't be fixed, and we know it's there. And all we can do is hang our head in shame. And so you try to find all the best ways you can to find the best compromise on all of that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, these things are so complex at this point.
They are, particularly in open world RPG where all the parts connect to each other. You know, I had no sympathy for the people who are doing a first person on the rails shooter. Your job is so much easier than what we did.
Now, and I guess that is one of the big questions, because you guys also did Elder Scrolls Online. And I also see here you worked also on Fallout Shelter. Which
I did a little bit of Fallout Shelter, that's true.
Yeah. So
Fallout 76 or Fallout Shelter? Fallout Shelter is the game.
Well, yeah, the iPhone game. The iPhone game.
Yeah.
And there I'm interested because both Elder Scrolls Online and Fallout Shelter are suddenly not you buy the box, now you've got the game, you play the game business models. So there's other streams of revenue going into this. Now, from a design standpoint, how did that influence? Because these are games that have to keep evolving over time. How did that change, if at all, your approach to designing aspects of the game?
Well, first of all, my work on Fallout Shelter was on a very, very small part of it. That was done by an outside studio that did all the mechanics of it. And what they asked for from us was a series of questlets that Fallout Shelter would do. And we wrote some extremely minimal dialogue, and it wasn't actually dialogue, it was just little text pieces that would come in the game, and put together some simple quest flow. And everybody in the department was asked to contribute a bunch of these, and I was one of them. And so we would submit these, and then they would implement them at the site. Elder Scrolls Online was done by a completely different studio, although owned by ZeniMax. Whereas, was the studio that did Shelter? Actually, the studio that did Shelter was also owned by ZeniMax. For a minute, I thought it was an outside studio, and it may have been at one point, and then we bought them. I'm a little fuzzy on that. But they built the ZeniMax Online studio in a different location. And we were really a completely separate operation. We only interfaced with them in terms of working on lore. They would have to run their story ideas and their lore by us, and we would have to approve it. So we did not work on any mechanics, any of the quests, other than lore approval, completely separate operation there.
Gotcha. Okay.
76 was done in-house, and we were all up to our eyeballs in that.
Okay. And how did that, now Fallout 76, again, and you're going to have to remind me, that was also a persistent, was that the persistent game?
A semi-persistent game. What would happen is every time you would log on, it would either find you an existing instance with an open slot, or would spin up a new instance and dump a bunch of people into it. So you would have, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but let's say 16. There would be 16 people in this instance with you, and there might be 500 instances running simultaneously. Next time you got on, there'd be a completely different set of people there. Although you did have the option to always get on with your friends if they were also on. So you would join their world, or they would join your world, or it would spin up a new instance where you and your friends would be there with some other people. So it was semi-persistent in that sense. If you built a base, it would store the base with your character and then drop the base down onto the instance that you loaded into. So I would call it semi-persistent.
Gotcha. Now, that almost sounds like there was some procedural generation going on in addition to, was it procedural in any way, or was the instance always the same design? It was just a new instance of the same design.
Yes, that latter.
Okay.
Map was always exactly the same. The activities that were available were the same, although something may have started in your old instance and not have started in your new one, but that was mostly a minor point. So your experience, suppose you were just playing alone. You're in a multiplayer game, but you're just going on and doing your own thing. It actually felt persistent from that point of view.
Gotcha. Now, the idea for this kind of, or this version of the Fallout franchise, what was the genesis of that? I mean, it seems just a weird offshoot, or somebody saw a tech demo of something and was like, this would be fun if we applied it to one of our licenses.
It almost was from a tech demo. Basically, somebody took Skyrim and made it so that two characters could run around. One character was central, the other character was ancillary, but you could actually see them running around. One of the programmers, or a few of the programmers, got together and worked on it. And so this was like, oh my God, we can have multiplayer Skyrim. Holy crap. And so it was like, let's make multiplayer Fallout, because the Elder Scrolls Online people already have multiplayer Elder Scrolls. Don't want to redo that game. Unfortunately, Bethesda as a studio learned one of its harshest lessons. As a studio, they had produced nothing but hits since Morrowind. Technically since Oblivion, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. So they had had a string of AAA games that were all Metacritic rated above 90, frequently above 95, had won Games of the Year. It was almost just expected if Bethesda comes out with something, it's going to get that. Well, it's Bethesda, of course it's going to Game of the Year, right? And so there was this hubris that we could do this. We could take a single player game and we just have to layer on multiplayer. What a huge fucking mistake. Even with a tremendous amount of help from the online studio, and those guys were legendary for us. The lessons learned in the differences and the needs of multiplayer versus single player, they just kept coming. The hammers just kept hitting us over the head. It was stunning how much more there is to the multiplayer game. So in order to make it work, to make it financially and technically viable, we had to keep stripping things out of it. Initially, it was going to be like Elder Scrolls Online. It was going to be a persistent world. And it just kept having to get scaled back until it became the thing that you see. And in fact, that's one of the reasons the map is so ginormous. The 76 game does not need a map of that size. It should have been a quarter of the size it was, and it probably could have been and been just as much fun and probably more functional. But it's a holdover from well, we were going to make a bigger game that allowed for way more players, that had way more persistence, but ended up having to be this.
Yeah, and well, I guess these are one of those things where you don't know that it's not possible until you have a build of it, and then it doesn't run or something.
Yes and no. There's always things that are going to come up like that, but the warning signs were there. People were saying it couldn't be done. People were saying you're biting off more than you can chew. And because we'd always been successful, we did not listen to people we should have listened to. The voices were out there. We didn't listen to them.
And so like you said, 6 months ago, you retired?
About 2 years ago.
2 years ago. 2 years ago, you retired. And since then, you went back to writing. Yes,
I am now a novelist. So now I write books.
So tell me, where did this passion come from, this new interest?
Well, if you think about it, my entire career has been making stories. That's what I've done. For over half my life, I've made stories, and I made stories in the fantasy and science fiction genres. And this is something that has always been in the back of my mind. Wouldn't it be cool? I'm a voracious reader. I read a huge amount of fantasy and science fiction, as well as a smattering of other things. And it's always been I could do that. I have that skill set. God damn it, I've got a degree in mathematics. I can write. But, my years at TSR taught me how to build stories. My years at Bethesda taught me how to write dialogue. My years in both industries taught me how to have the discipline to keep working at something, how to set goals and how to manage making them. I was in a really good position, and this could be something new and different that I could wholly own, and I was certainly not lacking ideas. There's all kinds of ideas I've had for books, and so I started off with Mischief Maker, a contemporary fantasy.
Okay, and when you say contemporary fantasy, are we talking mages in a real world setting? Are we talking a fantastical world that just happens to have similar technology to ours?
What I write used to be called urban fantasy. The Jim Butcher books, the Dresden Files, those were in their heyday called urban fantasy. In other words, wizards in a modern world. And then urban fantasy underwent a shift to where it got defined as having a strong romantic component to it, usually an unrequited love aspect to it. And that became a centerpiece of it. So it moved away from that. So I can't call my stuff urban fantasy. Now it's contemporary fantasy.
Interesting.
So in my particular situation, Loki, the god of mischief, is hiding out on Earth as a stage magician in the suburbs in modern day times. And he's not technically a god. He's just a guy who happens to live forever and can do a few special tricks. And that's actually what all the other Norse gods are too, is that they have a few special tricks, making them a little bit more than human. And so you play this out, and I got to build a world of my own. I've obviously spent a lot of time world building over the years. So I built a whole new interpretation of the Norse mythology, and had my character Loki go through it and have to stop another Ragnarok. And at this point, my third book in the trilogy is on pre-order and will be out at the end of March.
Oh, amazing. So I'm guessing the first book is the backstory because you still followed that old rule.
I no longer make detailed backstories. That was my lesson. When you
Okay.
start coming down with ideas, they're the ideas that are actually going to be played and happen. You skip over all the work of making the backstory. So, for example, I have sketch notes for what the world building would be like, but I didn't go into extreme depth. I let the telling of the story, the writing of the story, help fill that out. Because as soon as I write down horribly detailed backstory, like I said and you just referred to, that becomes the exciting story. So make the exciting story. Write down the backstory as you need it, as it comes to you. Give yourself enough pieces that you've got some consistency, and that'll produce a better final product.
And so now with this trilogy coming to an end, are you already planning the next trilogy or trilogy of trilogies, or are you going to try to take this world that you've built and these characters and adapt them into a game?
No. I think video games and I have parted ways for the foreseeable future. Never say never, but I don't think that's going to be going on. I might dip my toe back into tabletop role playing because that's an easier thing to go back into. But I think I'm done with video games for the foreseeable future. No, my next project will be another book. I'm probably going to continue to do that for a while, as long as it still feels exciting and fun. The advantages of being retired is that you get to do things that you find are exciting and fun. You don't have to do the drudge work.
Oh, come on. And I was actually thinking of the pen and paper. I mean, D20 open gaming license is still out there. Knock on wood. So,
you can make tens of dollars writing in that environment. Tens of dollars. That's not totally true, but it is a smaller market than I think most people believe or understand.
Oh, no, yes, extremely. Well, this is where what you really need to do is just take a copy of your book, put it into ChatGPT, and tell it to turn it into a game module.
There you go. Yeah.
See what comes out on the other end. Yep. Bruce, very, very exciting. This has been extremely informative. There's one final question that I ask of all of my subjects.
Okay.
And that is, looking back at your career, name one thing, one trend or development in the industry that caught you by surprise, you did not see coming, and one trend that you thought was going to be huge that went nowhere, that fizzled out.
Well, for the first of those, I'll go back to my tabletop days. If you had told me that a collectible card game where he who spends the most money wins would be a viable industry, I would have laughed at you. And in fact, I did mock Magic the Gathering at one point. What do you mean? If I spend more money and buy more cards, I have a better deck, so I win? No way people are going to accept that. Wrong does not even begin to describe what happened to that. I was so wrong. So wrong. The other one's a more difficult question. Things that didn't happen that I thought would happen. I would say I thought altered reality, not virtual reality, because I was pretty sure that wasn't going to go places that we thought it would go. But I thought altered reality would make a bigger stamp by now. I thought that would, enhancing your experiences with video would be more engaging. Pokemon Go is probably the closest we actually got to it being something that actually took off, and it actually really fizzled. And I thought it was going to go more.
I can totally see that. As someone who's currently an instructor at a university, it's we're all our big speculation at the moment is what happens when we get true AR goggles and Google Translate and ChatGPT basically just can give people answers to everything. But that's I agree with you. I kind of expected Google Glass. I thought that's going to have to take off. There's no way that doesn't take off. But
yeah, unfortunately, creepy pervy guys looking up women's skirts killed that one.
yeah. And people kind of don't like being recorded all the time when they're talking to people. So
that ship may have sailed.
yeah, that is very, very true. Okay, Bruce, I cannot thank you enough for your time. This has been
To do it.
fascinating. Remember, everybody, Bruce's books, links are in the show notes, so please check those out. And any final words for fans of all the products you have worked on over the years?
There are very few products that I am embarrassed to have worked on. I am fortunate to have loved almost everything I did. It is rare that happens. But when you decide what it is you want to do in life, make sure it's something that you really enjoy. I know other people have said it, and they've said it better than I have, but it makes all the difference in the world. And if you want to do it, start doing it. Don't wait around for someone else to provide the prod. Go out there and do it. That's how my career got started, and I can't think of better advice for someone who wants to get a career going.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl.
Okay. I hope you've enjoyed another Video Game Newsroom Time Machine interview. You can leave us comments on Twitter, Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, drop us a couple of bucks on Patreon. All the links are in the description below.